Welcome for today's discussion on the lesson that is on respiratory system in anatomy and physiology. For today, we are going to concentrate much on the upper respiratory system. I call for your attention so that you can easily understand the lesson for today. So right away, let's start off looking at what is actually respiratory system. So in this case, we are saying that respiration, first the system we discussed about what are the systems that are formed by the number of organs in the body in order to play its function. And the respiration in this case, it is said to be scientifically, it is said to be the process by which oxygen is obtained from the environment and delivered to the cell or to the cells, and carbon dioxide is transported to the outside in a reverse pathway. So what we are saying in this case, respiration, when you take it in the layman's language, they say it is actually the exchange of air between the lungs and the environment. That is not what the respiration is. That is just the breathing. But respiration, it means the air has to be gotten from the environment to be taken into the lungs and has to be distributed up to the level of the cells, because are the cells that needs oxygen for their physiological function. And also the carbon dioxide, which stands as a byproduct of this oxygen from the metabolic mechanism of the cells, it has also to be transported from the cells up to outside the body. And by so doing, that's what we call respiration. So in this case, we are saying respiration, it is actually the exchange of this air from the environment up to the cells and from the cells up to the outside the body. We are going to see the physiology, how it goes. So here we can see the diagram that is showing us the respiratory tree that we are going to deal with, and just like it has already been mentioned today, we are much concerned with the upper respiratory tree. So we'll be dealing with the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the larynx. That will be the main focus of our attention for today. So now, respiratory system, that you need to understand, first thing it has that it actually involves 3 phases, and you are going to appreciate these phases, so the information about these phases in line with the definition that we have just given. So we're saying that the respiratory includes these 3 phases. The first phase, it is actually the pulmonary respiration. So when we say the pulmonary respiration, in this case we are talking about the exchange of air between the atmosphere and the lungs, or the air sacs in the lungs, which are the alveoli. And this is actually accomplished by the inhalation and exhalation of breathing. So this is what we are saying. So the exchange of air between the atmosphere and just the lungs, it is said to be pulmonary respiration, because pulmonary we are just dealing with the lungs. And we also have external respiration. External respiration, in this case, this is the exchange of air that is going to happen between the lungs and the blood in the circulatory system, whereby oxygen, it is going to be dissolved in the blood that is circulating, and the carbon dioxide, it is going to diffuse from the blood into the lungs for exhalation, or to be expelled outside the body. So we're saying external respiration, in this case, it happens between the lungs and the blood, whilst it is still respiration. And then we also have the internal respiration. In this case, internal respiration, it is the exchange of that gas or oxygen, so to speak, to be limited between the blood which is circulating and the cells, because just like we have mentioned, is are the cells that needs to utilize the oxygen that is being inhaled. So the exchange between the cells will be producing the carbon dioxide from their metabolic products, and then they will be getting the oxygen from the blood. So that exchange, it is what is said to be internal respiration. So we can see that actual respiration involves all those phases, from the lungs, blood, up to the cells. But when we are just confined on the lungs, we're just talking about the exchange of air between the lungs and the atmosphere. It is just the breathing, which is inhalation and exhalation, or expiration and inspiration. So this is what actually we are discussing on this matter. So we can see we've got the lungs inside, both 2 lungs, and we can see that the air that is coming from the blood into the lungs, and that from the blood, from the lungs to the blood, it is actually symbolized as being external exchange, which is external respiration. And up at the upper part and the lower part there at the bottom, we can see where it is written internal exchange. How is it demonstrated? Body cells. So we can see that the cells are actually getting oxygen from the blood and they are releasing carbon dioxide from them into the blood. That is actually what we're saying to be the internal respiration or internal exchange of the gases. Quite alright. All the cells of the body, they need oxygen in order for them to play their physiological functions or metabolic mechanisms in order to maintain homeostasis. And now for these cells to have this access of oxygen, it is enhanced by the respiratory mechanism that we have just alluded to. So we are saying that most of this energy is derived from the chemical reactions, which can only take place in the presence of the oxygen that is going to be attained from the respiration. And also the metabolic waste of products that are going to be produced as these cells are working, it is actually the carbon dioxide. And this carbon dioxide is going to be excreted or eliminated out of the body through the very reverse mechanism of respiration, which is the inhalation of the air. So you're saying that the respiratory system, it provides the routes by which the supply of oxygen is going to be attained from the atmosphere into inside the body, and also carbon dioxide is going to be getting, or rather is going to be excreted or eliminated outside the body. So now, the condition that this air you'll be inhaling from the atmosphere may be at the various conditions, so to speak, that some of which is not actually required in the body. What primarily is it that we're talking about in this case? It could be that the air that you are breathing in, it is hot more than what the body requires, or it could be cold than it can be very cold than what the body requires. It can be containing the pathogens, it can be containing dust particles. All those conditions are present in the atmosphere. But now, this respiratory system, it is going to provide the mechanism of maintaining homeostasis by which the air that is going to be distributed or to be transported to the cells will be at the good condition as that which is required. So we are saying as the air is breathed in, moves through the air passages to reach the lungs, it is going to be warmed if at all it is very cold, or it is going to be cooled if at all it is very hot, in order to suit the body temperature. If the air is very dry, it is going to be moistened so that saturations of oxygen can easily take place. And if at all it contains some dusty particles, it is going to be cleaned so that at least the internal environment of the body can be maintained at the constant level. And we're going to discuss on how this mechanism actually takes place. That's the primary function of the respiratory tract, and we're going to go through so that we can fully understand how this mechanism actually happens. So we're saying that the blood, it provides the transport system for these gases between the lungs and the cells of the body. Just like I have said, there's the external respiration and internal respiration. All these type of respiration are actually enhanced by the blood being the connective tissue, which is the transportation medium. It is actually essential for the transportation of the gases. Primarily, oxygen is attached to the hemoglobin, which is the red pigment or the molecule that is found within the blood or the red blood cells, and it helps in the transportation of this oxygen to the cells that requires this oxygen in this case. What are the structures and the functions of the respiratory system? Quite alright, let's look at our objectives. By the end of respiratory system, each one of us should be able to know the structure and the function of the nose, should also be able to allude the structure and the function of the pharynx, also the larynx, its structure and the function, should also be able to talk about the structure and the function of the trachea. We also have to be able to talk about the two bronchi that are actually under the lower respiratory system. We've got one in each lung. We've got right and left bronchi as the primary bronchi. We're also going to talk about the bronchioles and the smaller air passages, which are the alveoli in this case. You are also going to be able to discuss or to describe the two lungs, which is the right and left lung, and their coverings, which is the pleural cavity. And you're also going to be able to gain the full understanding on the muscles that actually helps in the respiratory mechanisms, which are intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. So by the end of it, expect to have the full understanding on these that we have talked about. So straight away, we are going to start with the upper respiratory tract, where we're going to be concerned much on the nose, pharynx, and the larynx. So this is actually what we are talking about. So that's how the respiratory tract is going to go. So to begin with, we're going to talk about the nasal cavity, and we're going to go over the pharynx and the larynx, just as it has been already mentioned. And at the lower respiratory tract, we're going to talk about the trachea, the right and left lung. We're going to talk about the pleural cavity, which covers the lungs, and also the internal structures of the lungs that are essential in the gaseous exchanges we've already mentioned in earlier phase. So now, let's talk about the nose. The nose, it is the organ that actually it is considered when it comes to the respiratory system. Not only that, the nose is also essential organ when it comes to the spatial senses. Those five is the spatial senses that we know. The nose is just one of it. And we are going to talk about both parts in this lesson. So as the air is entering the nose, it is going to bifurcate into two, or rather it's going to follow the two roots, which are actually the cavities that has been said, the nasal cavity, just like it has been mentioned here on above. And we are saying that those openings of the nose are said to be the nostrils or the nares. So never get psyched out when you hear the term the nostrils and nares. We're just talking about the openings of the nose. So immediately inside the nostrils, where between the roof of the mouth and the cranium, we know the cranium from the skeletal system, are the two spaces that are going to be said to be the nasal cavities, just like mentioned. And these cavities are going to be separated into two partitions by the nasal septum. That's why if you look at the anatomy of the nose, just physically, if this is seen, you are going to see the two openings that actually enters inside. So these two openings are divided by the nasal septum here, and we're going to talk about the structure of this nasal septum. And the air will be passing through those nostrils that we're talking about. So the superior portion of the septum is formed by the thin plate of the ethmoid bone from the skeleton or the skull, and it also extends downwards, where at the inferior part of it you are going to find the vomer bone. And we're saying that the anterior extension of the septum, which is the flat part of the septum that we can easily see with our naked eyes, there is a hyaline cartilage. That's why the structure of this septum, it is more like not really fixed, but it can be easily movable because of this hyaline cartilage that is actually being composed of. So we're saying that this septum that actually separates the two cavities, it is lined up with the mucous membrane, and we are going to talk about the function of mucous membrane. But just in brief, do know that this mucous membrane's function is actually to secrete the mucus, and the function of the mucus, it is going to play the major role in the trapping of the dust particles, the microorganisms that can be held, so that they may not go up to the far of reaching the lungs, where they can result into an infection. And also the humidification, the warming of the air that is being breathed in, it is going to be enhanced by these mucous membranes that are highly vesicular. So we're saying that the mucous membranes that lines the nasal cavity contains the blood vessels, which delivers the heat and the moisture to the air that is breathed in, just like mentioned earlier. And the cells of the membranes, they secrete the large amount of fluids in each day. This fluid is actually in form of the mucus that actually traps the foreign bodies that may be held together with the air as you are breathing in. The environment, the atmosphere, it is exposed to different number of particles that can be pathogenic, that can be as foreign to the body. So all these are going to be trapped together by these mucous membranes. That's the mucus that is secreted with the mucous membrane, which lines up the nasal cavity. And the foreign bodies like dust particles, the pathogens, are going to be filtered like mentioned. Air is warmed by blood vessels, by blood which is in blood vessels, that surrounds that are found within the mucous membrane. So as blood is moving within these blood vessels, it is going to generate the heat, which is going to warm the air that will be breathed in. And air, it is going to be moistened by the liquid secretion, which is the mucus that has already been mentioned. That's the function actually of the nose or the nasal cavity when it comes to the respiratory system. And now let's talk about the function of the nose when it comes to the it of being a sense organ. So we're saying that the nose is the organ of the sense of smell, and it has the nerve endings which actually are essential for the detection of this smell from the odorous material. So we are saying that also in the nose there are going to be found these accessory structures, the sinuses that were mentioned when you were looking at the skeletal system. And these sinuses, their functions actually, it was to lighten the skull, and they also join in the nasal cavity, and they regulate the also plays the function in the resonating chambers of the voice. And these sinuses are actually very susceptible to infection, more especially the upper respiratory infections. Okay, so here we can see the diagram or the visual area is demonstrating the nasal cavity that we are just talking about. So we can see many structures that are related to this nasal cavity. And from here, I would like to encourage you to pause the video so that you can follow through and study on these structures that are linked to the nasal cavity. Thank you. I guess you are now fully aware and acquainted with those structures. This diagram here, it is just demonstrating the flow of air within the nasal cavity. We've been talking about the nasal cavity quite right, isn't it? Quite. So we have seen that there is a nasal cavity to your left hand side up there, and we can see the arrow that is demonstrating the inlet of air. So the air will be passing through the nostrils, two nostrils that we've talked about, going downwards to the next respiratory structure that we are to talk about in this case, where there is the pharynx and the larynx. So we are done with the nasal cavity. Let's talk about the pharynx. The pharynx is just one of the structures of the respiratory system. Quite interesting on this one, it does not only play the functions in the respiratory system, but also in the digestive system. Just like it was with the nose, not only in the respiratory system, but also in the what type of sensory organ. So even in the pharynx, what do we mean in this case? The first thing you need to understand is that the pharynx is actually the muscles that you are going to find on the throat. It's composed of the muscles on the throat, and it carries air into the respiratory tract. Also carries the food particles and the liquids in the digestive system. And okay, sorry, it has been repeated, and the air in the respiratory system. So this is what we're talking about. And now, what makes it so special to be able to place all these functions? Quite alright, we're saying that actually the pharynx is in three parts. We're going to find the nasopharynx. This is the part of the pharynx that just joins immediately from the nasal cavity. And we are going to find the oropharynx just posteriorly to the mouth. That's why it's named oral. So it's just behind the mouth. And there's also the laryngeal pharynx, which actually extends to the pharynx. So the pharynx is just adjacent to the laryngeal pharynx, and the oropharynx is just behind the mouth, and also the nasopharynx is just behind the nose. That's why nasopharynx. So in this case, that's why it is possible for the person to breathe from the nose, also from the mouth. Why is it like that? Because at the point of the pharynx, there is a link between the mouth and the nose at the oropharynx. So the air will be coming from the mouth through the oropharynx into the larynx. Air will be coming from the nose through the nasal cavity, the nasal pharynx, oropharynx, and to the larynx. So this is actually what we are talking about in this case. This is the demonstration that is showing these locations that we're talking about. So just from where the nasal cavity ends, we've got the nasopharynx, and we've got the oropharynx just behind the mouth, like it has been mentioned, and the laryngopharynx, which actually joins with the larynx. So now let's move on to see the structure of this pharynx. So we're saying that the pharynx actually, it has three structures. It has the mucous membrane, which plays the function like that, or the mucous membranes in the nose that we've talked about. So we're saying that in the nasopharynx, it is continuous. It is the continuous from the mucosa membrane from the nasal cavity, and that all the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx is the continuous from the esophageal muscles going downwards, and it's mucous membranes. It also have the fibrous tissue, which helps to maintain its integrity, and it forms the intermediate layer. It's actually at the middle of the structures of the pharynx. And also it has the muscle tissue. This muscle tissue actually helps in the deglutition. In this case, deglutition, we're just talking about the swallowing mechanism. So we're saying that it consists of several involuntary constrictors muscles that plays an important part in the mechanism of deglutition, which in the pharynx is not under voluntary control. Why is it not under voluntary control? Because we're talking about the swallowing mechanisms, both for the air and that of the food particles that can be ingested. So they are under involuntary mechanism. They do not need never impulse, or rather control, for them to actually contract and relax to allow their contents to pass through. So the upper end of the esophagus is closed by the lower constrictor, except during swallowing. So this is actually the function of the pharynx on how it helps to manage regulating both the digestive system and the respiratory system. So as the person is breathing, the pharynx is going to make the esophagus to close up. As the person is inhaling in, is swallowing food particles, is going to make the respiratory system or respiratory tract to close up, so that foreign bodies or materials, matters cannot be found lost or getting into another tract. How does this happen? Let's see. We're saying that we will see that under the functions of the uh, pharynx. So we're saying that one of the functions of this pharynx, as one of the structures of the respiratory system, is that it is actually acts as the passageway for air and food. So we're saying that the pharynx is an organ that is involved in both the respiratory and digestive system. Air passes through the nasal and oral part, and food passes through the oral and laryngeal part. Or it has been quite alright. So what we are saying in this case, the food particles will be passing from the oral into the digestive system, and the air, it is going to pass from the oral and the laryngeal part of the pharynx. Hence the mechanism of separating the food particles from the air that has to be found itself into the airway tract, which is the larynx in this case. Another function of the pharynx, it is warming and humidification. Having said that it has the mucosa membrane, which is actually lined with the blood vessels, it also have the function of warming the air as it is passing through it, and humidification because of the presence of the fluids that will be secreted from the mucous membrane, which is the mucus in this case. Then taste. The pharynx, it has the part of oral pharynx. Hence, there are olfactory nerve endings that are found within the oral part of the pharynx that actually plays the role in the detection of the taste, as being the one of the sensory organs. And it also plays the function in the hearing, because the auditory tube, it extends from the nasal part to each middle ear, allows the air to enter the middle ear. So we can see that there's actually the relationship between the nose and the ears. Why? Because at the point of the nasopharynx, that's where we're going to find the auditory tube, which goes to the ears, and to send the air into the ears just through the sinuses that are found within those bones. Another function of the pharynx, it is actually for protection. How? We're saying that the lymphatic tissues are going to be found within the pharynx. They are actually what we call laryngeal tonsils. These tonsils actually plays the function in the detection of microorganisms like antigens and microorganisms like bacteria that can be held together with the air, and this is going to trap those microorganisms to destruction. Also, just the mucus that it contains, it is going to play the role in the trapping of those foreign bodies, hence playing the functions in the protection. So the tonsils, when you hear the tonsils in this case is not a problem, but it's just the structure of the respiratory system. In layman's language, quite alright, people they say I've got tonsils, meaning the tonsillitis. So when the tonsils becomes inflamed, that's when we call it tonsillitis. But when tonsils on its own it's just the structures of the respiratory system. Never miss up. So this is what we're talking about. And we're saying that actually mostly these tonsils are larger in children, unlike it is with the adult, because they tend to atrophy or like to shrink, to reduce in the size. And also the pharynx, another function, it is actually in the speech. The pharynx functions in speech by acting as a resonating chamber of the sound ascending from the larynx. So the larynx, that's where the voice it is actually generated from, passing through the larynx and also in the mouth as the person opens up the mouth together with the tongue producing the voice. Because we said that the pharynx, we've got the oral part of the pharynx, which is the oral pharynx. So it plays the role in the speech. So these were the sum of the functions of the pharynx. We move on and look at the larynx as one of the structures of the respiratory system, primarily the upper respiratory system. So the larynx, mostly it is commonly known as the vocal box. Why? Because this is where the voice it is generated from, and its location it is found between the pharynx and the trachea. That's why we've got the part of the laryngopharynx. So from the laryngopharynx is just the part that actually is adjacent to the larynx. So you're saying that it has the framework or the cartilages, part of which is the thyroid cartilage that protrudes in the front of the neck. So in front of the neck you are going to see the protrusion of the cartilage, the thyroid cartilage that actually makes up this pharynx. And the projection, it is actually commonly called as Adam's apple because it is larger in male than it is in female. That's why it was named as the Adam's apple, but not Eve's apple. Quite right. It's just a commercial joke. So in this case, what we're talking about is that it is larger in male than in female, hence called the Adam's apple. So the folds of mucous membranes that are used in producing the speech are located in both sides at the superior portion of the larynx. So at the upper part of the larynx, you are going to find the mucosa membranes, or rather the folds of mucous membranes that are essential in producing the voice that needs to be signaled as the air is passing through them. It is going actually to induce the formation of the voice. So we are saying that the vocal folds that we're talking about, or rather the vocal cords, are going to vibrate as the air is passing through them from the lungs, producing the voice. So the variations, the length and tension of those vocal cords, which are actually on the superior part of the larynx, they are going to determine the pitch of sounds. Remember, the length of the vocal cords are going to determine the pitch of sound. And the amount of air that is forced over them, it regulates the volume of the sound that is to be produced. A difference in size of the larynx and the vocal cords is what accounts the difference in adult male and the female voices. That's why you're going to find that the people are advancing in age up to the level of teenage to adulthood. The larynx in male tends to become larger and the voice gets bigger because of the increment in the size of the larynx compared to that it is in the female, or in female gender, quite right to be said. So in general, the larynx is larger than in male than it is in the female, just like it has been mentioned. So the spaces between the vocal cords, it is called the glottis. Take note of this one. the space that is found between those vocal cords that we've talked about, it is called the glottis. So it is at the glottis where the air from the lungs is going to be pushed through to produce the voice. But now, what keeps its integrity, or rather what makes it possible not to allow any detection or to the passing of the foreign bodies that may be found within the airway tract due to some abnormalities, it has what we call the epiglottis. So this epiglottis is just the cartilage that actually covers the larynx during swallowing so that no food particles can pass through the airway system. So we're saying that the glottis and the epiglottis help to keep food and liquids out of the remainder of the respiratory tract, but rather to be flowing through the digestive tract. And as the larynx moves upward and forward during swallowing, the epiglottis, it is going to move downwards so as to cover the larynx or the glottis. So that's how the mechanism happens. Once there is a stimulation of the swallowing, the larynx is going to sense that as it is going to move upwards. I guess you can feel it. You can use your fingers, try to do as if you are swallowing. You are going to find that the larynx actually it moves upward and forward. So as that happens, the epiglottis is going to cover the glottis so as to stop the breathing and to prevent the aspiration, or rather the introduction of other foreign bodies within the respiratory tract. So this is what we are saying in this case. And this is the structure of the larynx that we're talking about. So we can see those cartilages that we have been talking about. We've got the clicothyroid ligaments, we've got the thyroid cartilage, we've got glycothyroid muscles, the cricoid cartilage, and the trachea down there. Then on top we have the glottis, and this is the what we are saying that the leaf-like cartilage which covers the glottis so as to avoid the passing through of food particles. And we've got the hyoid bone, which is the suspended bone on the larynx or on the neck that we can easily feel as you are palpating it. And in there we have just demonstrated the both views of the larynx, both anterior view, the posterior view, and the cross section, so that we can see easily the structures of the pharynx. You can pause the video and see nicely those structures of the pharynx, or rather the larynx, so to speak. Thank you. What are the functions of the larynx? Having described the structures, its location, its mechanism, now what is the function of this larynx? The first function is that it plays the role in the production of sound. How so? Remember, we talked about this larynx as being the vocal box, where it contains the vocal folds or the membranes or the cartilages that actually when air is passing through from the lungs is going to produce the voice because of the vibrations that are going to be stimulated or going to be produced when the glottis actually shrinks so as it to produce those vibrations. So first, the function of the larynx, apart from it being the respiratory structure, it produces sound. Not only sound, but also speech. This occurs during expiration. Remember, the sound can be produced as long as the air is passing through, but also the amount of air that will be produced. It is going to actually to produce the volume and also the speech in relationship with the other structures that are related to the production of this heat, rather the voice. And also another function of this larynx in the respiratory system, it is actually protection of the lower respiratory tract. One, it has the mucous membranes that secretes mucus to detect or trap the foreign bodies so that they cannot go to the lungs. Secondly, it has the epiglottis which covers the glottis during swallowing or deglutition so as to avoid the food particles to pass through the larynx. And also it is function in the voice production, just like it has been mentioned. So these are the structures of the upper respiratory system. We talked about the nose or the nasal cavity and its structure and the functions. We also went on talking about the pharynx. We talked about three parts of the pharynx, which is the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. We talked about the structures and these functions, and we also went on talking about the larynx. We talked about the structures of the larynx and how it plays its function. And friends, this has been the end of today's discussion. Next time, we are going to start looking at the lower respiratory system. Go over and over, more and more, so that you can easily understand this topic. You can only understand the lower respiratory system where you have the solid understanding on the upper respiratory system, and this is going to stand as our basic line of data as we are going to talk about the respiratory system. For today, I say bye. Thank you.